So I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about the practicalities of what live ops actually means from the point of view of someone who owns the product. I've been involved with running games for about 21 years. I don't think there's many people in the world who've been doing online gaming for 21 years, but I'm one of them. So I run a lot of online gaming services and backends, and hopefully my slides will appear. He says, yay! So I was involved in an online gaming service called Wireplay, which was back in the days of dial-up modems. I was involved with running an online gaming service for mobiles. It was a company called 3. I believe you have 3 here in Hong Kong. So Hutchinson One Power owned a number of companies around the world. I was the global lead for games for Hutchinson One Power at the time. I designed the games back-end in the era of Java mobile games. And then I later worked with PlayStation on PlayStation Home, a virtual world, which was the first free-to-play console experience back in 2008, before we had free-to-play on most mobiles, which is interesting. So I've been doing this a long time. I've been involved in consulting on lots of different projects, and I'm going to try and share what I've learned throughout that period. So you may have seen this earlier if you were here earlier. Why do we play? Competence, completion, control, escape, and social capital. These things are the kind of reasons that motivate us, and why we pay is down to this same mindset: fear of missing out, anticipation. I sometimes call this opportunity cost, but fear of missing out is quite a nice one. Abnegation, so putting things aside. So understanding what motivates people to actually spend money, why they spend time with you, is the first part. But because of lack of time, I'm going to drive straight through. And he says, let's have a look at product versus service. Now, these are not real numbers. I've just made these up, but they're not untypical of what I've seen historically. So particularly if you look here, a product typically will have quite a high peak because it's got hype value, but because it doesn't have retained elements, no ongoing live operations, it falls off a cliff. And then you get this sort of low, long tail kind of level of revenue. But if you have a service, you tend to start with a minimum viable product, so that's why it doesn't tend to get quite so high on the first hype, and it drops. Sometimes it drops quite low, nearly as low as a game that is a product, but if you've got it right, you'll see an ongoing gradual growth that follows from that point. Why? Live operations. So another reason why that's interesting to sort of get your head around is to look at the Gartner hype curve. Those of you who were with us earlier and saw me talk about monetization would have seen this graph already. Essentially, we look at the hype curve, how people have to have a certain level of anticipation to engage with any game, whether it's a barrier to purchase or if it's just having enough hard disk space on your phone. There's always a reason why you're going to have to make a choice. So why would they choose your game? But once you've got that anticipation over that point, the first experience we have with the game is always the worst, because we don't know the controls, we don't know how it fits in our daily routine, there's so many other games out there, it's going to be a terrible experience unless we're really, really careful with our onboarding. So we have this process of discovery where people get excited, a process of learning where people decide whether it fits with them or not, a process of engaging where they start to actually realize this is the right game for them, and then hopefully we can super engage them and get them to spend lots of money, but also engage more and bring more players into the experience, and then re-engage them before they churn, and then finally they leave. It's a normal cycle. Did you notice how close it was to the design of the chart we see of data? That's when I realized that games as a service is about player experience. So that's literally the data I saw when I was running services. I like to think of it as a funnel. So imagine you tip the funnel over. You know about funnel analysis, I'm assuming. So I like funnels. And if you think about discovery, generally we're talking about lots and lots of people in discovery, gets less of the learning and then less of the engaging. Eventually we get the super engaging guys. But what's interesting, especially those of you who've done growth hacking, will understand when you have somebody activated, when you move them from discovery to engagement, that's an active process that you can influence. When you take engaged people and convert them to spending. Now, spending doesn't necessarily have to be cash, it can also be watching ads, but obviously there's a kind of cycle between get me to spend money, to spend time, to watch ads. All these are a process. But what's also interesting, if you have a great game, is you activate your members to get more members. And the super engaging guys activate the community, the engaged community. They provide aspirational reasons to play. And if you're not connecting what makes a super fan really cool in your game to how you promote them through the engagement audience, you've missed something massive in your experience. And also, if you haven't thought about how the engaging people get new players in, I know the whole Facebook virality is dead, but it's not at the same time. It's actually incredibly important. Word of mouth remains the single most important reason for people to come to any game. Where does word of mouth come from? Engaged, happy players. So what's all that about? I think about live operations as a cycle. It's not just about the servers, although the servers are important. It's about a circle, knowing how user acquisition turns into player engagement, how player engagement is supported and fed by content and feature updates, how that is in turn fed by events and promotions, and community builds and grows out of that, gets to taking that information, taking those updates, and that gives you more things to share in your campaign development, which you can then lead into your user acquisition. If we get it right, this is a virtuous circle and grows like a snowball falling down a mountain. So let's try and break that down a bit. What do we mean by player engagement? Well, if you have more players, that's great. But if you have more players doing more things, and more players doing more things more often, and more people doing more things more often for longer, that's what scale is really about. It's not just about spending more money getting more people, it's keeping them doing more things more often. So how do we do that? Well, let's think about content releases. Let's think practically, what does that mean? Content, by which I mean not the things that are functional about the gameplay, but the things that are maybe cosmetics in some cases, maybe about gameplay in the sense of flavor, not necessarily new features, but maybe a new episode, maybe a new story, not necessarily a new way to play. Now, how often does that happen? Well, some games are going to want to do things daily. Some are going to want to do things weekly. Some games can't, and they'll end up doing things monthly. I'll give you a little lesson, though. What I found by running a mobile Java game service is if I updated it every week, guess how often people came back? Every week. When I changed it so I updated every day, guess how often they came back? Every day. And when I made it so I updated the site every 4 hours, guess how often they came back? Every 4 hours. Now think about what that means, all right? Now, you're not going to be, no one can actually update their game every 4 hours. It'd be crazy. But we have servers. We can schedule things. We can work out what the right cadence is for our audience, how frequently we want to do updates. But also we can do different kinds of updates. Some of them will be daily challenges. No rule changes, no gameplay changes, just a different score, or play this level, who gets a high score table this day with these rules. That's configuration. That's an event, but that's also something we can do every day. Something we could do every 4 hours. But then we might want to have, here is an object, we're going to give you availability. We'll give you an increased amount of drop of loot crates, or drop of energy crystals, or whatever it might be. Oh, hang on a minute, that's something we can do scheduled. That can be weekly. Maybe we can actually release new images, new assets, new variations, but we could maybe package them on a monthly basis. So understanding not just how often you do things, but what you can schedule to do them. But the key thing here is predictability. Quality is important, but it's reliability. Quality of the experience is great. Quantity is okay, but reliability is so important. But also desirability. There is no point having daily challenges that no one cares about, because they don't come back. If they don't come back, guess what? We don't do them. We do something else that they do come back for. But that idea of being able to think about things as systems, and pipelining things as well as part of that, and the same thing happens with feature releases, actually understanding how we can create features. Now, when I look at feature pipelines, I'm not going to have necessarily, it maybe take me 3 months to release the feature about coding needed. But I might try to break down, once I've released the feature, when I actually make it available. I may not make a new feature available when it's finished. I may stagger elements of it so I can create events around that or content releases around that support the experience. So the key thing about when I get the development team to work, I'm thinking first of 1/3 of the code we get to work on in that period is anticipation items. We just call them tentpole releases because the tentpole holds everything else up. So we used to have something we could communicate in every release. We had retention features, particularly focused around the user experience. So about another third of the process. And the last third was always code debt. Always make sure that some part of your feature releases fixes problems, because you're losing users when you've got code debt. So always make sure that when you're planning, you have a pipeline of ongoing content releases. And typically we were using a 3-monthly. Some people do quicker than that. I think 3 months is quite good because you can do good big features. Whereas I think content needs to be released weekly generally. But it's also just worth thinking about how you split it up to make sure that you've got something to release that's communicatable every month. Events. Now, this is the bread and butter of live operations. This is the core of it. Again, we're back to scheduled. We're back to predictability. I am going to say predictability probably every slide, because it's the most profound thing about what makes live ops work. If you know that you're going to get something cool happening next week, guess what? You hang around till next week. Because if you don't tell people there's stuff coming, and you're not trustworthy that you deliver that stuff, or waiting for that stuff is going to take too long, guess what we do? Go and play something else instead. So live ops is about understanding. Now, how much of your scheduling can you do on the server? Seriously, I mean, how much of can your live team change? If you've got a setting like the guys were talking about earlier, whether it's Extra Life or Chili Connect or PlayFab or GameSparks, whatever, I've used most of these things. All of these things can have configurations for your games. That if you expose elements of that to your live ops team, if you can plan and schedule, if you can have a process that allows your live ops guys to propose what the next week feature is going to be, have that signed off, and if there are any code changes or if there are any configuration changes needed, or if there's any assets like a GIF just to promote it, or a message within the game, they can all be scheduled and processed systematically and scheduled in advance. You take away all the pain. It becomes manageable and scalable. But also, you've got to think about, when you do an event, do people care? How does it contribute to your retention? And it's interesting how, if you think about events, a lot of them are focused, and a lot of games are focused on getting people to use their consumable goods that they've earned through play. It's get a sink away, value. And actually, that can be very fatiguing for players, especially if it's just the same thing every time. So you have to be very careful about creating too much fatigue by having too much activity that's just boring and the same thing. It's got to be interesting, it's got to be desirable, it's got to keep people feeling the game is fresh. Promotions. Well, it's kind of where we make money out of those activities that we're trying to do, because we give people offers. We give people the opportunity to decide, yes, I don't want to miss out on this great deal. There's a bundle, there's a special thing, there's a new item that's never going to be available ever again. And one of my favorite examples of this was the way Subway Surfers take you around cities as part of their events. But the items, the promotional part of that, is the assets that are only available in that city during the month that they're in that city. They make them feel rare, valuable, and it gives you a history of how long you've been playing the game, because you can look back at all the assets you've got and you can show off to other people who weren't there. You don't know what it's like, man. You weren't in Rome when we were doing Subway Surfer in '94, whatever. It's really powerful stuff. You've got to think about desirability, but the desirability will be different for each life stage. So however you break up your analysis, your data of your players, think about their life stage as well as their source and attribution, all these other facets. And realize that they'll have different needs. So your promotions have to be carefully measured to appeal not just to a broad audience, but to specific targeted audiences as well. To really think there's got to be texture and interest and desirability. And measure what is the contribution of the effort you put in creating those events and promotions to the return on investment. Because if you're putting a lot of time and effort and work and you're not getting an increase in revenue, what are you doing? My favorite thing, favorite lesson, was also the worst lesson I learned. I did a sale for mobile games back in 2004, where I did a buy everything, it's a third off. And we had 3 times the revenue in the month we had the third off sale. And then for the next 3 months, we got nothing. We basically ended up net, after if you took 3 months lifetime for our audience, the sale delivered a 0 return on investment. Because although people bought excitedly at the point where the sale was on, they didn't buy for the next 2 months, completely negating the value of it. So by targeting the sales later, I ended up with basically product lifestyle pricing. So we had specific games that would be reduced over time, and that reliability, that predictability gave me the value. So return on investment, measure it, understand why it works. But also interestingly, back to events can be sinks that encourage people to then go and spend on the promotion. So if I've got an energy crystal, and the particular event I've got gives me a need to spend that energy crystal, but there's a special offer for that energy crystal, there's a cycle there that can be really powerful. So you also have to be careful you don't screw up the other way, where they're getting lots of payouts that are the thing that they should be buying. You've kind of got something wrong there. Anyway, so think about promotions, really powerful. Community, authentic. Your community has to be authentic. That's the crux of it. They are the living embodiment of your audience. And you have to trust that. You have to embrace that. They should also be champions for the team amongst that audience, as much as they are for the players in your team. And the closer and more integrated they are with the wider team, the better. Now, I think that social media folks and community folks should be not necessarily the same, but at least deeply connected, sat next to each other, ideally. But ideally, the point for me is the community allow us to communicate the events and promotions that are coming up in a way that's authentic and valuable, but as long as they have a voice where they are putting the players' interests first. Because if we're not putting the players' interests first as a game experience, the players won't care. And we won't get the revenue we get from putting promotions out. We won't get the engagement we want from events because we're not authentic. So keep your community close and embrace them and trust them. Problem management. Now, I suppose this is the bit where the network actually matters. If you don't think about this, it's going to cause you issues. Problem management for me is twofold. Some of it is about moderation. So, anyone heard of the phrase TTP? It's basically when people start drawing naughty things on screens. You can imagine what the acronym stands for. But we literally, it's a phrase we used in every big company I've worked with, because it is the first. People draw penises immediately. They can. They will find the most amazing things that you would not think possible, and make rude pictures out of them. So you need to know how you're going to deal with that. It's going to happen. You need to deal with that with problem management. You're also going to know that someone's going to try and bring your server down. Someone is going to try and hack your communication system. Someone's going to try and break your network. Someone's going to put a man in the middle attack. How are you going to do it? Who's going to get called at 3 a.m. when the servers go down? Now, you don't have to do that yourself. There are companies out there who will do that for you. They have algorithms that make sure that your game will stay up, or they will find the problem within 15 minutes. That's powerful stuff, and it's a cost to you if you don't do it. Think how much money is being lost in your game if the server's been down for an hour, a day, a week. I left Sony before it happened, but they had their servers attacked and they went down for like a month. Sony. Ouch. Anyway, sorry, let me go back one. Yes, network operations are important. So key thing on here is triaging. So when you're looking at your network, triage, put the player experience first, but learn. Think about continuous process improvement. And that is really, actually, the single most important thing to take away from this. Always look at what happened, try to work out why it happened, improve. Continuous process improvement is vital to managing successful games, and it's doubly vital for live ops. So this is kind of a picture of how I look at it. You've got this flow, this linear flow from release to user acquisition. Oops. This flow here. But then you've got this cloud of activity that has to communicate to and from each other. There wasn't enough space to put all the arrows I wanted to put in. But you kind of get the idea. They all have to work together, otherwise you don't have live operations. Last kind of thing, really, it's like practical steps for you to think about, to take away. When you are making your game, think at the start, not the end, the start, how your server design is going to work. What things can you put on the server that the team, the live ops team, can affect? Because that's the limit of what you're going to be able to do to create events, if you think about it. The more you can give the live ops team the ability to configure, the more ability you have to maximize your live ops. Pipeline. How can you make new content, new features systematically? And separate the release of your content and your features from the point where the players first access them. We want to have machines of just constantly churning, new outfits, new content, new goods, new treasures, new weapons, new things, jump, move. And we want to make sure that when they are available, the live ops team can go, okay, that thing there we've just finished, we're going to put that in. That thing we finished 3 weeks ago, we decided to hold off till now because this event is the best time to put it out. Let the live ops decide when the players access the experience, because they can then make the most of it. And framework, think about how you can be creative within a set of tools, because you don't have to build everything at once. The joy about live ops is you never have to surrender a feature, because it can always be introduced later. But think creatively within what you can deliver your minimum viable product, and grow and learn and use the data to inform your pipeline of new content and new features, because you've got information about what players actually want. And if you're led by your community, then you'll be led by what players want, and that is where you'll get satisfaction for players. That's it. So I don't know if that's useful. I don't know how much I'm gonna moderate myself now and see how much time I've got left. He says not. So I probably only got like 2 minutes, or we're running 10 minutes late, by the way. So does anyone have any questions? I can literally be asked on any subject. I probably have an opinion on everything to do with game development, but it looks like I'm frightening you with my hat. Don't be frightened. It's a friendly hat. In that case, if no one's going to ask me anything, it was either a terrible talk or I just gave you too much to think about. I'm going to assume the latter.